Well, welcome to Living Hope Online with us tonight. We are glad that you are here. We are on two platforms, live.elivinghope.com. Is that right? Live.elivinghope.com. I got that right. And we're also on Facebook Live, so thank you for joining us in both of those platforms. Please join us in the chat online so that we can see your questions and your comments and we can interact with each other. That's the whole purpose of live, is so that we can all interact with each other. And so it's not just us up here talking to you, it's all of us having a conversation. So we want to welcome you to the chat also, not just to watching the video. But we're here tonight to talk about some really cool things, or at least I think they're cool, because I'm a nerd. But that's okay. Let's start out with going around the table and introducing ourselves. Patrick, you want to start?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Patrick.
Good evening. I'm Mary.
I'm Carrie.
I'm Charlene.
And I'm Justin.
And we're here to talk about some crazy things that I think are really cool, conspiracy theories.
That could be dangerous.
It could be, what do you mean that it could be dangerous? Anything that I think is cool could be dangerous? That's quite possible. But we're here to talk tonight about conspiracy theories. And I'm going to get to the point. I promise there's a point to it. But how many of you have thought about conspiracy theories a lot? I do. I like reading them. Don't laugh at me, Justin. I like reading about them and hearing all the crazy stories and figuring out where they come from.
I like it.
I mean, we have got some famous ones. Can anybody think of some famous conspiracy theories that are out there?
That we never landed on the moon.
That we never landed on the
That's a good
moon.
Earth is flat.
Earth is flat.
Oh God, people still believe that.
People still
They
do,
do.
yeah.
There was never a plane. There was never a plane at the Pentagon.
There was
Oh,
the-
yeah.
people
oh, yeah,
say that.
9/11.
Pardon
They
me?
say there was in a
They say-
plane.
no, well, people are saying that 9/11 was fake.
Well, they're saying it was an inside job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I've heard
that
one.
Michael, whatever his name is, Michael Moore.
Yeah.
He doesn't even believe that it was like, yeah.
Yeah. They say that there were two shooters on the grassy knoll when John F. Kennedy died, at least two, that it wasn't just a one-person.
Job.
Yeah, one-person job. Anybody else think of any other conspiracies?
Well, I didn't have one. I was just breathing in.
Well, one of my favorites, and I actually think this is true, is that, and I've seen proof, is that a lot of what the news tells you is not real. It's because the 6 largest corporations in America own all the TV news stations.
Yep.
So they tell you what they want to tell you to get you to go spend money. And
I've heard that.
Believe
Well, I
this.
believe that because at a different hospital that I worked at a couple of years ago, that was when, remember, for about 3 weeks, every minute of every day, they talked about Ebola, that it was here, that the people had brought it over here and all that. That lasted for about 3 weeks, and then it was gone. You didn't hear anything else about it. So what I want to know is what was the government doing in that time that they needed us to be focusing on something else?
Right?
Why they
Oh,
slid something else.
diversion.
Well, see,
Yeah.
what now-
That's
what now-
true.
what
I
now-
think
what
there's
about-
a lot of that goes
I
on.
do too.
A
Wow.
lot.
Well, now what about the coronavirus?
Yeah, what about
Think
it?
about this.
What are they
all of a
hiding?
sudden, we've got big problems with China,
Uh-huh.
and then all of a sudden, now there's this coronavirus. So guess what? Nobody's focusing on the problems that
What's
we
really
had politically
going
with
on.
China. Now it's the coronavirus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
This is
but that corona.
Just-
It got real. It got real quick. It got real quick.
It got real quick.
And what about Bigfoot? No, I'm kidding.
See, no, I was going to bring that one up.
That's a good
I
one.
was actually going to bring that one up, that Bigfoot. There are a lot of people that believe that Sasquatch is real and that Loch Ness Monster is real.
I was just going to say that.
The Loch
Yeah.
Ness Monster.
Old Nessie. We can't forget
Yeah.
about Nessie.
I also heard that there's a lake in Montana that people think that there's a Loch Ness-like creature in a lake in Montana.
See, I would like to go to those places and see for myself.
You would go. You take a road
would.
trip out there, wouldn't you? Just to see if
Yeah.
there's a Loch Ness-like monster
Yeah.
in
Well, all
Montana.
I know is that the Native Americans have a lot of stories about, and I've seen some weird things when I was out there on the reservation that didn't make sense. So I'm just saying.
Like what?
Well,
Sorry. Now I'm
No,
curious.
go for it.
well, they took us, because it's on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Look it up. It's the poorest place anywhere. They need your help. We can tell you how to do that. Okay, anyways,
Good
so
plug.
we
I
went
like it.
to the Badlands, and I don't know if you've ever been in the Badlands.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
beautiful,
I have.
but there's
Beautiful.
also a lot of weird things that are associated with the Badlands, like people going in, nobody ever finding them, and
To trying?
like the Bermuda Triangle, all that kind of stuff. So when we was going through there, Ruby, which is my friend that lives on the reservation, she told us that the Native Americans believe that there is an old woman who sits in the Badlands up in the mountains, and she is knitting. And she's knitting the world. And so when it starts to unravel, that means the end of time is coming, right? If she ever finishes it, then the world would end. That's what they believe. So there is a dog that supposedly sits at her feet, and every time she gets close to finishing, the dog unravels what she's knitting. So the world keeps going, right? So they say that if you go out there at a certain time, that you will hear this dog barking at the old woman, and you'll hear the old woman shushing the dog. So we went out there, and we're out there looking around, and we heard a dog barking, and
Did you
then
really?
we heard somebody, it sounded like somebody going, shh, several times. I'm just saying. Now, I don't know if that's technically a conspiracy theory, but that's
Well,
freaky.
I was out there about 3 years ago. I didn't hear anything. I got cheated.
Did you?
Well, I was
Yeah.
in the car. I just drove through it. I didn't really.
No, you got to get
Oh,
out
I
and
had
walk
to get
around.
out.
I
At
didn't.
night. You got to
Oh,
go at night.
see, that's the thing. Dark.
Yes.
Me and dark don't go.
Yes.
We don't mix well. There's lots of stuff like that. There was
Area
something-
51.
Area 51. I was
Oh,
going to
that's a
say
good
the
one.
aliens. Yeah, I heard somebody say that they might be hiding aliens in Fort Knox. I don't know,
I heard there's no gold in Fort Knox.
and because they replaced it
Make
They
room
with
for the
replaced it
aliens.
with fake,
with
and that it's somewhere
Notes.
else.
Yeah.
wow,
That it's fake. It's somewhere else.
that the real gold is someplace else.
And if you ever watch the stupidest show on earth, the Oak Island, oh my gosh.
Do we know anybody that watches that?
Yes,
I
we
don't.
do.
Do we?
We know several people.
Ah.
Yeah. I watch it. I think John watches
Oh,
it.
Pastor John
So
probably.
does my husband.
Calling
Oh,
people out.
Does he?
They found a coin and
calling
a
them
piece
out.
of wood. That's what they found in 17 seasons.
wow. That's all they found? I don't know. That's crazy. Well, there's
Well, I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories
yes.
going around about our government people.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
People in leadership that somebody doesn't want there. You know, I think there's a lot of that goes
Yes.
on.
Yeah. In our own personal lives, we might have some conspiracy theories or know of conspiracies in our own life. For instance, me. Okay, so
This
I'm
is going to be good.
This is good. And I don't know about that. I got a couple of stories. So the other day, it's about a month ago, I was walking through Kroger, and I am a book nerd, so I walk through the book aisle, even though I never buy one. I saw a particular book on the shelf that's a famous book, famous author, and she's on the cover. I'm trying not to give it away, but she's on the cover of the book, and I don't want to say that she is controversial, but there's very strong feelings regarding certain people in our world, and she's one of them. And when I walked by the book was turned around, so only the back of the book was showing, and it was blocking all the other books. So it's almost like, and my immediate thought, because I am apparently a skeptic, my immediate thought is somebody rudely turned that book around and hid all the other books so that people wouldn't have to see the person on the cover. And that made
Now I
me
gotta
so
know who it
mad.
is.
Michelle Obama. So it made me so mad because I'm like, why would somebody be rude like that? And so I turned the book around. And I was complaining about it the other day to a friend of mine, and she says, Carrie, there's a logical explanation for why that book might have been turned around. And I said, what? And she said, it's possible that they picked the book up, read the back of it, and then
Set it down.
and just set it down. That there was no no malice
Malintention.
at all. And I welled up and I said, no, there was sinister intent. Like I'm hitting the table at dinner. Like there was sinister intent.
Well, yeah,
It was a
of course.
conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy.
'Cause see, I knew you were going there, so I went ahead of you and I turned that book around just because I knew it would drive you crazy.
That does sound like something you would do.
Yes.
That sounds like something you would do.
Neo
Well,
conspiracy reversal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get Carrie's goat right here and just turn this book around. Well, I'll admit there may not have been sinister intent behind the book conspiracy that that caused so much anger in me. But because it just felt rude to me, and I'm like, oh, sinister intent for rudeness. Well, so I admit that might be far-fetched, but I had a bad situation at work where it felt like, and I'm the first person to say, I don't necessarily trust my feelings, but it really felt that and there were a couple of people at work who were trying to who were taking every shot they could at me to throw me under the bus for something or make me look bad or, just because these people have a tendency to be pretty negative people and, they're only happy when they're complaining about things and, they actually like to see people that's the conspiracy theory going around the building. But it really felt like that for me. Like, are these people really out to get me? And I brought it up to my boss. I said, I know this sounds crazy. And I told her, and she goes, no, that's not crazy at all. I totally could see that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So in that instance, it was validated that it really did feel like somebody was out to get me, and it's possible that they were. So have you ever had any instance like that in your life where you felt like somebody was out to get you?
Well, if you've ever been in the workforce, you've probably gone through something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's just common in the workforce, offices, your hospitals. I hear about the worst. So yeah.
I was just going to ask, is anybody...
Yes, we just real quick, welcome to Susan and Allison, David, JC, Todd. We've seen all of you guys log on. Awesome to have you here. I think that one of the things for me is that there really is something to sometimes people don't have the best intent. And part of our pre-conversation really centered around that, I think, before we went live. Was just, and it had nothing to do necessarily with the topic. I mean, it did,
It's
but
funny,
not because
though,
of
that. It worked out that way.
It did. And so I think the reality is that whether people are really maliciously out there trying to get us, or whether people at times have maybe their own agenda or their own things going on, and that does directly impact us. I think there's gray area of that. I don't know. I'd like to believe there's not a group of people sitting around in a living room somewhere right now being like, okay, how do we get Justin? However, there are days that it feels like that, at the same time. So I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting to.
Well, and I think too, that people make their own stories up in their head about what is happening. That's how you come up with conspiracy theories. You may take this much truth of something, and then in your own mind, you turn it into something else.
Like I did with the book turning.
Yes,
Yeah.
like you did. Because
All
it
I did was
just-
see a book backwards.
Because the only fact that you had in that whole scenario was that there was a book that was backwards.
Yeah,
But in your mind, you turned it into everybody's out to get Michelle Obama.
I did. I thought it was rude.
And so that ruined your whole day.
It did. It made me very angry.
Yes. And so I think we as people are great storytellers in our minds.
Not me.
That's interesting.
Because we see information and we try to make sense of it. So we concoct mostly all these stories in our head that are not even anywhere near true.
Listen.
And I think that's what happened to me today at
Yeah.
work. I really think that's what happened. Somebody thought that this was happening this way, and it was not that way at all. But instead of checking the facts,
They took a little fact
they took
and
a
turned
little
it.
fact and they turned it into something malicious, and it wasn't, which in turn ended up hurting quite a few people, and now has caused friction and animosity and fear.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. Somebody just commented about how occasionally people that they work with might think that they're trying to take their job, and because of that, they'll withhold information. And I think
Yep.
what's interesting is like you can end up being like the victim, if you want to. That sounds harsh, but being on like the wrong side of maybe somebody's malicious intent, ultimately, based off of that other person's insecurity, right?
Yes.
This person may have no intent of taking that other person's job, but just because the other person is feeling insecure about
Right.
that and is worried about that, all of a sudden now they feel like they have to take some sort of action or withhold information or whatever
Yep.
it might be. And I think that's an interesting idea, like how, again, so many times I feel like I beat that drum a lot on here, but I think fear and worry and things like that really drive us and impact us in so many ways. It's kind of
and I
interesting.
to go along with that, I think that, you know, what would be like a button for you may not be a button for me. But, you know, and when something does happen, we filter that through all the crap. Like, I don't feel good enough. I'm ugly. I'm whatever. And when somebody says something that triggers one, and I hate that word trigger, when somebody does something that hits you in that area, then you're immediately that little 9-year-old kid or whatever whenever that happened. And so you filter everything through that.
Has it ever affected how you behave to or around those people that you feel are attacking you?
Well, yeah, because you don't trust them anymore.
That's true. And it's hard to be nice to them. If you think somebody's out to get you, it's really hard to be nice to them. And of course, we're supposed to love everyone. I said that with
We
such
are.
such downtrodden.
Have to.
Yeah.
I get quiet when something like that's going on.
Yep.
I
You
just,
withdraw.
You withdraw?
I get quiet, and I would, to a point.
Yep.
When I reach a certain point, then I will confront them and say, "What'd I do to you?" I
Yeah.
always bring it to
Yeah.
me. Start out, what did I do, or But at first, I'm silent. Totally.
Yeah. I hit that silent point, but then I stay silent and I'll back away and be silent, but that whole addressing the confrontation is not something I really want to do in life.
But I think sometimes when stuff like that happens, it just like blows your mind because it's like out of nowhere, and you're like,
Where did that come from?
You don't understand it. You're just like, okay. I mean,
Well, I think there are times when you can just ignore the whole thing.
there are times you can
Yeah.
do that.
And there are times when you need to speak up.
Yeah.
And you need to be wise enough to know when.
Yeah. Well, to bring it back to who we were talking about tonight, which is Joseph. If you have ever heard the story of Joseph, it's a really great story. I definitely would like to be Joseph sometimes in my life, and it's really hard to be. If you haven't read the story of it, it's in Genesis. Check it out. It's a really great story. But basically, the synopsis is this. Joseph is son number 11 out of 12 of Jacob. And Jacob loves Joseph so much that it's easy to tell that Joseph is his favorite. The older brothers, they get really, really jealous. I mean, there's even a nice coat that his father gave him, and all the older brothers are jealous. So they literally do plot against him. This is actual, in the Bible, they were plotting against him. They were thinking about killing him, and they were thinking just, sell him into slavery and tell their father that he got killed, which is what they did. So he ended up in slavery in Egypt. And, am I right? Yeah, Egypt.
Yep.
I second-guessed myself there for a second. I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. In Egypt. And in Egypt, he actually was working at a house called, Potiphar's house. And he was working there, and he was, Potiphar really appreciated him, put him in a high state, put him in a high status of his, to run his household. And then Potiphar's wife started to plot against him. She actually tried to seduce him, and he rejected her. So she wasn't about to take rejection. So she said that he did something that he didn't do, and Joseph wound up in jail for it. So this is twice now that Joseph has literally been plotted against. And I mean, after that, you have to think, what was going through Joseph's mind at that point? Like, the whole world's out to get me. I can't get ahead in life. Everything, my brothers, threw me away. I'm in jail now for something I didn't even do. And even in jail, he was in jail with someone who was close to the leader, and the guy said, when I get out of here, I will not forget you, and you'll get out of here. And then what happened? The guy forgot about him. And so, I mean, just all these things. He was forgotten. He was thrown away. He was, accused of wrongdoing and falsely accused and imprisoned for it. I'm like, this guy can't catch a break. Everything is just so terrible. But in every instance, he wound up being even more, I don't know what the word is, but even though it felt like one step forward and 5 steps back, he actually hit a high mark in every one of those situations. When he was thrown away by his brothers, sold into slavery by his brothers, he wound up being the leader of a household in Egypt, of a pretty, well-to-do man named Potiphar. So he wound up being the leader there. When he was in prison, he wound up being the guards actually made him in charge of the other inmates. Like, even in prison, he had a high status point, And then when he was forgotten, and then it came around that he ended up seeing the king. His whole thing, what God instructed Joseph to do, the gift that God had given Joseph, was to interpret dreams. And in every one of those instances, he was able to do it. God's purpose for him still, shone through his life in every one of those instances, and he followed it every time. No matter how downtrodden he was, no matter how much people went against him, he still was able to thrive in that purpose. And so my question is, how difficult must that have been to still, feel like the world's out to get you? And in this case, the world was pretty much out to get him. Everyone he came across, there was always somebody there who was out to get him. What's the drive that Joseph had? What kept him, still moving forward with God's purpose in his life?
Well, and I think what's interesting, too, is we do a good job of, in movies, books that we read, and the Bibles, I think, no, it's not excluded in this, right? But we do a good job of hitting kind of the highlights of people's life, right? Sometimes the low lights of people's life, but certainly the highlights of people's lives. And so, and I think it's actually in this passage even, where the cupbearer, I want to say, but somebody gets released from jail, right, is supposed to go talk to somebody on his behalf, doesn't do it, and then it very nonchalantly says 2 years later.
Yeah.
Well, I have a hard time believing that during that 2 years, guy didn't get a little bit depressed, a little bit frustrated, a little bit questioning, and maybe at times was he just going through the motions or in the grind of it all. And what we like to do is, or what we're guilty of doing, I think sometimes, is assuming that these people had none of those problems. Well, nobody wanted to write down 12 pages worth of how Joseph didn't deal with it well, or how maybe he was
happened in those
hurt
2 years?
or worried or felt like he was abandoned or whatever else. But, I mean, that doesn't mean that he didn't have those kind of reactions. I mean, obviously nothing super notable happened during those 2 years, otherwise it would have been in there.
So
that's 2 years. I mean, for us it's a line that we read, but for him it was 2 legitimate years of his life. And when we come up against those hard times, I think it's easy for us to, especially nowadays in our culture, to want to expect that things will be fixed right now, right? Oh, it should be fixed right now. And sometimes it's going to be 2 years. And sometimes it's going to be 5 years. Sometimes something might not come
It's
out the
so
way we want it
true.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read something somewhere, and it was pointed out just nicely about Joseph, and it's something that we could take when injustice happens in our life. Joseph was obedient but hated. He was obedient to his dad, but his brothers hated him. He was lovable but slandered. Potiphar loved him, put him in charge of his home, but yet Potiphar's wife slandered Joseph. And he was used by God. But he was forgotten. Even while being used by God, he was forgotten in jail. But still, even after that, and after those 2 years, he was able to be used by God again. And he saved an entire nation from famine. 7 years of he interpreted a dream that for 7 years there would be plenty, and then for 7 years there would be famine. So they got a plan, and they saved everything up to handle through the famine. He rescued an entire, after all of this, he still, pretty much saved an entire nation by doing what God had instilled in him to do, but the gift that God had given him. He was able to use his gift even though, he'd gone through all kinds of garbage. So.
Okay, I think I talked this to John, but I was reading this book, and it's poetry, actually. And this one said, I can't quote it, word for word, but as we go through life, we run into, this man called them chinks, or you could call it crack.
Yeah.
But it's big enough that God's light still pours in. So that had to be happening with Joseph.
Yeah.
He had to have a relationship that we probably haven't attained, and that's what got him through that. But that impressed me so much when I read that, because who hasn't had chinks in their life or a crack somewhere? But it's always the light shines through that, and we've experienced it, haven't we?
Yes.
So I think that's what Joseph was doing. God never left him,
Yep.
but he had to learn. He didn't get to the top just, he learned a lot on the way there. And his relationship with God must have been
Yep.
what I wish I could have,
Well, I was just going to say, I've never really thought about it that way until Justin just mentioned the 2 years. And then hearing you say it now that the 7 years of fortune and then 7 years of famine, what goes through my mind is that the trust and the faith that Joseph must have had in God to go through all that. First you start with your family, and then you crawl out to be even higher, and then to lose that. So it's just, and the amount of time. We're talking what now, 16 years total?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, probably.
And he never, I'm sure he questioned, and I'm sure he struggled,
Yeah.
but he always stayed with God.
Yeah.
Well,
God was with him. He kept that relationship, his faith, his trust, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
I start,
but Justin,
how
I'm
many of
sorry.
us would wait that long?
Well,
Yeah.
I remember, I've read that story a bunch, and it seems like each time I read it, I get something else out of it.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah, exactly.
I think that sometimes we also forget at the beginning of that story, like when he got the jacket and all that, he had a dream that said, basically, you're all going to bow down to me. Even my father is going to bow down to me.
How
So
how
he
else
was
to
a
make your
little
brothers
bit
mad?
Arrogant. I think
He's
he
kind
was
of a lot arrogant.
He was very arrogant.
Which
He
frustrated
and
his
he would throw
brothers.
it in
Yeah.
his brother's face, and he would wear that coat while his brothers were out taking care and doing work, and the youngest brother is sent to check up on them in this nice fine coat that he was given. I'm not saying they should have sold him to the slavery, but I think as the more often I read that now, I think God was humbling Joseph and letting Joseph
that's a good point.
and letting see, you know what I mean? Because the Joseph who met his brothers at the end, the one who forgave them and all that, was not the same Joseph that he started
No.
out to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, had he not went through all that, would he have been the man that God made him to be?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I don't think so.
I don't think so
I think
either.
the things he went through made him
But
grow. God knew
yes.
what he was doing.
And I think what made it turn out so well was that he saw that. And those 2 years, maybe he was thinking about all of that stuff and all of this. And he was open to it. Instead of being like, well, why am I here? Blah, blah, blah. He was like, oh, okay.
Well, I think a very important thing that was said tonight is when Justin said, we want everything to happen right now. And I think we miss a lot by being that way instead of slowing down. And we've even heard message on that lately, slowing down, not being so busy and giving God his place. But we'll get up and still expect something to happen right away.
Sure.
And it never, when you're learning, you don't know how long it's going to be. Or
Well,
you may
yeah.
go through something and it end, maybe a storm, and it end, and 2 years later you go, I
Well,
know what I would, yeah.
And that's what kind of makes me think, God gave him that vision at the beginning, and he always fully intended for that vision to happen, but Joseph wasn't ready for that vision to
Right,
happen
right.
yet. So that doesn't mean that God took the vision away, that's what his life was going to be. He just had to get to that point to where he was able to live in that vision.
Well, he wasn't arrogant anymore.
He wasn't arrogant anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah, so somebody commented on here, I don't wait well, and I'm the same way for sure. And the big idea I had for our talk tonight was that even when you're going through, even when it feels like the world's against you, you can still be used greatly by God. But now that we've had this chat, it's possible that the big idea really is that maybe all the things that we go through is how we get to the point where we can be used amazingly by God.
You're right. I believe that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like, and I've had this talk with Pastor John before, that I look back over my life before I fully committed myself to Jesus and his ways, that I can look back now and see when God was with me and the things that happened because God was with me. And now it's like, because I understand that and I can see it, I understand and I have a closer relationship with God than I did then. Not that my relationship doesn't still need work, I mean, I'm still struggling and trying to build a stronger relationship with God than I have now, but
It's so much easier to see that when you're looking back
Yeah.
than when you're in the midst of it.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, like he said, like Justin said, the 2 years, we don't know what those look like. But if Joseph is anything like me, he was having a really hard time in that moment looking at what was going on and seeing God in it probably. But to your point, that might be how he grew, was that he knew God was there.
I definitely think that. I said not too long ago, there were some people on my front porch. I believe the world needs a front porch.
Yes.
But we were talking hard times, one of them was, and feeling sorry for themselves, and that's okay. But I said, I've had a lot of ups and I've had a lot of downs. I'm 77, so you have to know that I've been through some storms, I've been through some stuff. And this is what I told those people. But looking back over my life, I can see where everything I went through taught me something.
But you got to be willing to learn and see it.
Well, yeah. Sometimes you don't think about it and you're learning.
Yeah.
Seriously, sometimes you don't think
Yeah.
about it. And it's like we said, you might look back on it and say, oh, Yeah, that's the way it's doing. And you know that you've learned it. You know that he
Right.
spoke to you.
Amen.
Well, praise the Lord.
There you go.
Yes.
So the challenge tonight is that, try to see God in those moments instead of being dejected and down and depressed and thinking that, the world's out to get you or that you're all alone. Maybe the challenge that we should go forth is, even if it's a bad time, it can still be something that God can use.
And even if you hit detours on the way to get there.
Yeah. The
doesn't mean
detours aren't
you're
bad.
still not going to be there in the end.
It's
Yeah.
possible that those detours is
Or
what got
what's
him
leading
there.
you there.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's leading us there. So thank you for joining us tonight. We thank you for all the comments. Invite your friends. What's great about Facebook is you can get on there, open up the live, and actually create your own watch party and have your own conversations. It's a really great tool. The point of this is that we can all interact with each other, and it's a safe place to have a conversation about God and life, and we want everyone to be a part of it. So join us next week. Next week we're doing it again, right? No? Next week we're off. 2 weeks.
Next Wednesday's Ash Wednesday.
Next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, you're right. So join us in 2 weeks. We will be back for another great conversation. And let's pray us out. Thank you, God, for this time. Thank you for letting all of those who joined us online and those who will watch us later, possibly not live, but maybe show it to their friends, to have conversations with them. Bless all of the conversations that have happened tonight and that will go on happening. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for
Amen.
joining us.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.